Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week we have Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cameron?
Hey, what's going on, Trevor?
What is going on? Not going to be a too long of an episode today, probably. I don't know. Every time I say that, we end up, rambling on about stuff for an hour and a half or 2 hours. But we're going to probably keep it on the shorter side of things. We're going to be talking a little bit about Rings of Power, House of the Dragon, and Disney Dreamlight Valley. Apologies for the lack of communication about last week, just not having an episode. We decided to take Labor Day off. And I'm realizing we're doing that a lot. So probably going to have to actually decide if we want to pull the trigger on just making this an every other week show, or if we're going to get back onto a weekly schedule. But life's been a little bit busy and crazy, and sometimes it's just nice to take the time off if you need to take the time off. So, other housekeeping before we dive into any of the topics. Friday Night Dying Light is winding down. Only 2 episodes to go, right, Cam? You sent over. We had episode 32 that just went live.
32.
So episodes 33 and the finale 34 coming out over the next 2 weeks. But fret not. I've been doing a whole new just long-term, let me play through a whole bunch of stuff in Skyrim. You can find those Let's Plays on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I've done so far. We're up to being the Dragonborn, and I'm going through the Companions quest line in my Skyrim series. So you can find those on Tuesdays and Thursdays, barring any kind of miscellaneous other Let's Play that I sandwich in there for the foreseeable future. And you can check out Friday Night Dying Light for the last couple weeks here as we wind that one down. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. So Cam, kick us off. The first thing you mentioned that you were eager to talk about today, the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power series on Amazon Prime. As I've not been paying attention to it, are we at 2-3 episodes out now? What are we looking at in terms of 3 episodes out? And how is a super lore nerd like yourself enjoying this series?
Well, so I really did not want to give too much emotional investment before the show came out. So I wasn't really keeping up with things. I didn't know characters who were going to be in there. I didn't know anything really about it. I wanted to kind of come in blind. Because otherwise there's expectations of what you're going to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that especially when a new group of production people are involved in a new project like this, where it does have you have the Peter Jackson's hallowed trilogy of the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship, Towers, and Return,
and then his less hallowed of the Hobbit stuff.
Yeah, the Hobbit is I still contest that it should not have been a trilogy for sure.
Duh.
But they really could have made a solid two movies out of it. The problems is they spend way too much time in the second film setting up stuff for a third that would come to fruition in the third film that just was not necessary whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
You could have I do think it's too long for a single film. But I do think that it is perfect for a duology adaptation. I think if you take the film that was made and you give it the strong cuts that I think it needs, to some editing and editing out plot lines and probably some whole characters on the elven side of things, I think you end up with a very a pretty dang good 2 movies. But that's just they just didn't do that. They said they wanted a big epic third film, and they should not have done it.
Yeah,
pure and simple. Now, on the flip side of that, Rings of Power. So Rings of Power, it's a brand new production team. It's a brand new group of people. It's a brand new backing studio stuff. New Line Cinema is totally out of it. Now, it's interesting because there is a lot of consternation and legal problems with the Tolkien estate and what has been licensed to whom and to where. The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings film rights I believe, are still controlled by either New Line Cinema or by I'm not sure who the production company that holds those are, but they still hold them. And on the flip side of that, you have the Silmarillion, which is the long unfinished magnum opus of J.R.R. Tolkien, that a lot of people, myself included, thought that the Rings of Power show was going to be about. We thought that it was going to be a sort of prelude or prequel, and because of course your characters are elves, you have like a long-standing cast that can continue on and basically like, yes, it makes sense that these younger versions of these characters are here because lore-wise and history-wise they always have been. I did not expect it to be strictly from the appendices, and for people who don't know, the appendices are the kind of side writing and private writings of J.R.R. Tolkien through various things like letters and lectures and just musings and writings that never got made into never were novelized. His son Christopher took the appendices and for the publishment of the Silmarillion, kind of like got them in as best way that he could to make sense of them, and then put them at the end of the Silmarillion, and then the Silmarillion was published years ago. And so the appendices have always been filled with like very interesting outlines of like really cool events of history, including the end of this, like the ending of the Second Age, like the couple hundred years that you see the reemerge. So after the fall of the Great Lord Morgoth, from in the Silmarillion, you have kind of like what happens to Sauron, what happens to the elves who were part of this war, like this, like thousands upon thousands of years of just warfare. What happens to those people now that they're entering a quote unquote era of peace? And so Galadriel, who is noted and canonically was a fighter in this massive epic long war, is in this show. She's trying to find her place in a world post this pursuit of a dark lord. And like dealing with putting down her sword, so to speak. So we see Galadriel in Lord of the Rings. She is this benevolent lady who is the fairest woman of all like history and societies. She's the most beautiful woman that's ever existed. But we're seeing her in her, like younger, like thousands, or like roughly 1,000 to 2,000 years before we see her in Fellowship, and you're getting to see a lot of a very different side of her that makes sense for where she's at in the story. You see Elrond. I'm actually a little sad that we aren't getting further back in history, because the origin story of Elrond and his brother Elros are actually like, it's really, really cool. And like they make some name drops for Elros, but Elros, between the two, Elros was always my favorite brother. Because where Elrond and Elros are half elves. They're born between humans and elves, and they're it's very rare that this species happens. And they have to make a choice whether to be elf kind or humankind. And Elrond chose elf kind for immortality and to live forever, but Elros saw the benefits of having having an end to a life and what can be accomplished, and basically establishes the greatest kingdom of men of all time, and is the direct ancestor of Aragorn. One of the things that Elrond in the books versus the movies is very well known for, like thinking to himself and musing, is how much like Aragorn is like Elros. In that, in the whole thing, like, and that's one of the reasons why Elrond, while against the marriage, does dote on Aragorn still, because they are distantly related.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool. So I would have loved to have seen that, because they have actually like a really tragic and cool backstory regarding like what happens to them and how they're raised. And you also deal with like the Sons of Feanor, which I think are actually a lot more interesting than kind of what we're seeing. And like the problem is that the era the Rings of Power are touching on are things that a lot of like non-big Tolkien nerd fans are super interested. People who have not read the Silmarillion, do not understand like what the era of Morgoth and how awesome it would be to put that on screen is, and like how epic and enormous it would be, because we're literally dealing with like godlike beings at that point. And like big climactic battles like all the fucking time. It's so cool. But we're dealing with like an era that is just appendices, which is just outline, which gives a lot of creative freedom to the writers to kind of develop this story, because you're dealing with like, okay, well, how does Sauron rise to power? Like, how does Sauron establish his base of power? when before he was somebody's lieutenant, he was somebody's second in command. He's still one of the most powerful beings that ever existed. For people who don't know, Sauron is a Maiar, which is essentially the equivalent of an archangel in Christian mythology. So is Gandalf and all of them, but particularly Sauron is notable for being not the most powerful in the history of Middle Earth, but definitely the most significant Maiar that's ever existed. And what he chooses to do and the ambitions he has makes him a very compelling character. And I'm interested in how they're going to approach this, because in episode 3, I think it had some weak points, but what was really good about it is it established firmly where are we at in the timeline. Where are we at in the events of things? Because a lot of people, myself included, thought we were watching something from 1,000 to 2,000 years before the War of the Last Alliance between men and elves, which is the fight that starts the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring that happens 300 to 500 years before
the Sealed Door and all that.
Yeah,
stuff.
all that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are also confused about the timeline because they don't understand. Once again, this is part of the problem, and they didn't explain it in the show, is that Numenorians, who are the humans that Aragorn's descended from, if you watch the extended editions of Return of the King or Two Towers, they name drop Numenorians and that Aragorn is 96, but it looks like he's in his early 30s. The reason for this is because Numenor was closer to the Undying Lands, because of a lot of other factors, and because he's also descended from Elros, who was half elf. Numenorians live the ancient Numenorians could live up to close to 500 years old. Elros, who was the first Numenorian, lived to I forgot how long, but probably close to 1,000+ years. So these men live a long time. And the reason I bring that up is because they bring up Isildur, it's not a spoiler. Isildur pops up as a character in episode 3, and he's a young man. And so people are like, what? How is this time? It's people just calm the F down. They are not compressing the timeline by any larger than Peter Jackson did. It's okay.
Yeah.
We're still okay. I'm super curious because at the end of episode 3, they introduced some really interesting stuff that I want to find the answer out to. And they introduce a character that may or may not be super significant. So I'm very excited for it. Because especially since I can kind of see where the first season's going and where the second season would go from there. And I'm very excited to see how things converge, kind of with my theory of how things are built. It's very cool. I like it a lot. The action could be better in some places, but overall, it's some weak points in CGI. But I'm really nitpicking, considering the fact that we're seeing Numenor, man. Numenor shows up in episode 3. It's the freaking coolest thing to see, the literal height of human civilization of Middle Earth. And, seeing them in their splendor and their grandeur is awesome. It's so cool. And we're also getting to the point where they have their two factions of a kind of quasi-cold civil war between the faithful and the Kingsmen, where the faithful are faithful to the Valar and the Eldar, the elves, in the Undying Lands, but the Kingsmen are those who are jealous of the curse. They hate that they believe they've been cursed with mortality. And so they hate that they die. And so they're jealous, constantly jealous of the Eldar and people from the Undying Lands. It's super cool we're getting to see that, and I love it, man. It's great.
I am just amazed at how I never knew you were this much of a Tolkien nerd.
Dude, yeah, no.
As
Tolkien,
long as I've
Tolkien
known
was
you,
the first.
I was I know he's definitely gonna know stuff about the Silmarillion and stuff like that. But I did not know you were gonna know that much, because I am much more surface level. I remember I've started to read The Hobbit a few times, and I always get bored and kind of drift off around the time of the Trolls. And
the Trolls is a weirdly tough part that probably should have been edited a little better.
I'm talking specifically the book. I've never.
No, that's what I mean. I mean the books. In The Hobbit, the troll
Yeah.
part can be a bit rough because it's definitely written at a different point in time than a lot of the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, I always enjoyed it. It was just always that was basically that's the last thing I remember about reading through The Hobbit. But I did when Lord of the Rings the movies came out, I did read through the full trilogy of Lord of the Rings. I remember I was reading it specifically. Like I have memories of being in my hotel room in Europe, in my like post high school graduation trip, and like reading the finishing bits of Return of the King and stuff, as like unwinding from long days of tourist travel and sightseeing and stuff. And that's like about the extent of my like. I really enjoy the movies. I think they're very well done, and they're fun to like revisit every now and then. I have the HD 4K Lord of the Rings trilogy that came out a year or two back. I really enjoyed the games, Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. And
I was not a fan of.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me, given that you know exactly where they're breaking timeline rules and cheating. And,
Oh no,
and,
no,
or,
I
or
just
like
I
coming up with characters and stuff like that.
I've never played the sequel. Although there's some stuff that I found out from the sequel that I'm just like, that just does not work out with anything. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Shelob, a very big character in the sequel.
Yeah, in the sequel, I'm like with that whole thing and her being like it's like this is like the J.R.R. Tolkien Nagini effect happening to Lord of the Rings, and I do not care for it one bit.
Yeah.
Because first off, anyway, I digress. To my original point, though, the first one I just couldn't really get into I just was not finding myself a fan of like the combat and stuff. My brothers was really, really into it, and like really enjoyed it. So I know it's good. It's just like it grabbed me at a time, and I played it during a time of I think Assassin's Creed fatigue.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Like I was still dealing with my AC fatigue.
Yeah, and
like that was still a thing for me. So yeah, it was just like it was not what I really wanted it. Like it's not what I didn't enjoy what I was playing of it, and rather than forcing myself to play a game I wasn't enjoying, I just kind of put a stop to it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, fair enough.
Nothing but love for the efforts that people put into putting together a original narrative in the Lord of the Rings universe is such a monumental task that if you can be successful on any level of that, I say props to you.
Yeah. I bring all of that up to say that like ever since this got announced and they were like, yeah, it's going to take place in the Second Age, thousands of years before the events of Lord of the Rings and stuff, I was like, okay, I don't really care about that. Cool. Like my problem, and I found this very succinctly described in a D&D conversation with like Brendan Lee Mulligan and Matt Mercer and Abria Iyengar, I think, not too long ago, is like so much of the issue with like high fantasy is like thousands of years of stuff and just nothing has improved, or like I think Brennan kind of highlighted like the greatest sword that ever like existed was created thousands of years ago. So how do you exist as a blacksmith in a society where you can't live up to something from 1,000 years ago?
No, I feel that. Yeah.
And so time in Lord of the Rings in particular, or the Tolkien kind of universe in particular, is like and I feel this a little bit in one of our other topics, kind of the Game of Thrones stuff, is like when there's like no advancement over millennia in terms of like society, really, it's like, okay, so everything's just kind of really stunted, and we're and so it doesn't feel like growth is happening, versus like something that was jarring to me because I wasn't expecting it, was like the leap in technology between Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. I was like, this is really weird, and then it's like, oh, but it is like 80 years, and that's a very easy time to make the jump from the like pre-industrial to like a mid-industrial age kind of society. It's like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. I'm just so conditioned to not expect like a realistic flow of time to happen in stories like that. So ever since like ever since the Rings of Power got announced and everything kind of coming out with it recently, I've just been like, I don't really care. I'm not it, like same with like the Gollum game that's coming out sometime.
I do not.
Yeah. So like
you have to sell me on that game. Like the sell for that game is going to be monumental for me. I probably will not be in. I will say the biggest reason why Tolkien does explain why that happens and why things don't, and it's not that things don't improve, it's that the end of the first age where everything is kind of at its highest peak point, in the second age goes to shit. And you're dealing with, at the end of the second age, you're dealing with, and like a part of the problem is that Tolkien was
Tolkien was a linguist first and foremost.
He was a linguist, but he was also a anti-industrialist. He was so the idea of like progression and like industrial revolution and things like that, that's strictly like, those are things that are established as being like those points of progress, and kind of like the idea of coal and oil and all these things being black and black and black, like the black of coal, the black of tar, the black of oil. These things to Tolkien are attributed to orcs. Orcs are incredibly ingenious in building massive contraptions and mechanisms and machinery, and technologically speaking, Mordor is more advanced technologically than anywhere else in Middle Earth.
Yeah, they come up with the big old explosion for Helm's Deep.
They do, and that's part of like the Saruman's influence and stuff like that. But and not to mention like Uruk-hai aren't orcs, but that's not for you, Trevor. That's for people out there saying, "Hey, don't flame us. We know there's a difference." Okay, I know there's a difference. But there's a big thing about it is that Tolkien was a man who idolized the past and put ancient stories like Beowulf and other stuff like that on a pedestal. And so he wanted to tell those stories, but he also wanted to tell them in a ever-changing world. The biggest explanation for why there's not a lot of advancement is because, whenever a society is like really coming to that zenith point, orcs come and ruin everybody's shit, and then they have to start over.
Mm-hmm.
Orcs come and they're like, oh, and this city was built and it was lovely and beautiful and wonderful. Then the orcs came and fucked it all up and destroyed everything, and then later on, the people who escaped the orcs' attack and devastation of that city established this place, and this place is still growing, and that and then it reaches its zenith, and then orcs come through and mess everything up and do all of that, and also like, oh nope, they had a civil war and that like devastated their population. Like, very real reasons why in like the ancient world, like we didn't see like vast advancements, like we've seen in like the last 4,000 years of like the introduction of like, things changed a lot with the introduction of mathematics in Arabia and Greece. You have like a lot of stuff happened all roughly around the same time for us culturally and historically, for us to make these very big massive leaps in the last couple thousand years that like Tolkien was not having happen in his. And part of it also was like, you have racial tensions between these enormous civilizations, and they're not sharing things. Dwarves are more technologically advanced than every other race, but they don't share their technological advancement. They hoard it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the big thing about Tolkien's thing, is like these people with these more advancements, they're either out for, and it's so interesting because like you could actually put a modern spin, and I don't think that this is the case, but you could definitely put a modern spin that Tolkien was colonialist, because he constantly has like this but it also goes into also like you can make the argument that Tolkien was racist, by attributing like quote unquote savage qualities to the orcs. Mm-hmm. And then the idea that like orcs were actually fallen elves, but then he like took that back because he's like, elves are too pure to, like, he's also a massive elven fanboy, and that's why elves are like the most perfect and pristine thing in elven like, you saw season 2 of Fantasy High, the dunking of elves that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And if you're ever in a role-playing game, remember, dunk on the elves. Unless you're in Dragon Age, in which case the elves haven't been dunked on enough. They're good. They're not the way they used to be.
True, yeah.
That's one of the things I like about Dragon Age is they said, hey, this Tolkien thing about elves being like the perfect? What if they were actually like a shitty fallen society? Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about Dragon Age. And so like a lot of it is about like the idea of like, there's not that progress that's being made, but the progress is being made. It's just not being made by the people that we're talking about. And it's also not being made by the quote unquote good guys. Industry is associated with evil. And I think that has actually, and unfortunately, Tolkien's biases towards industrialization and like society and cultural evolution with technology is his bias against that, it has unfortunately fettered and bled and fed into the fantasy genre as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at other parts of the science fiction genre, whether it's in sci-fi or in like strong sci-fi, like Asimov and other stuff like that, high space fantasy or high space, you
Yeah,
could
I mean,
call it.
I was gonna say it's not my issue with like generational like lack of progress is not exclusive to high fantasy here because
Oh, for
Star
sure.
Wars is another great example. The fact that like you have all the same technology a millennia ago in the age of the Old Republic as you do in like the like current timeline of Star Wars stuff. It's like that is weird. Why is technology not improving or changing? Like you just always had space travel and nothing has gotten better in a thousand years. Okay, cool. So
Well, I
I
think
think just
if you take
storytelling in general has a tough time grasping that because we are, like these stories that are trying to tell millennia of like history and stuff, like we don't have that to draw from. We can't like I mean like we have like our example of that and and it's we don't have that in a in a broad fantasy setting to be like here's how it was 10,000 years ago where elves weren't doing this thing or that thing or whatever. And like it's I think it's also just very overwhelming to try and tell a story that spans those kinds of epics in a way that is like digestible, which is again just looping back to this like Rings of Power for me has always just been like a that's like I and I don't know if I picked this up somewhere, but I did kind of have a sense that it was going to be diving into the appendices of the Silmarillion. So I
Well,
was
I
like,
kept
I
myself
don't.
super blind to it.
Yeah, yeah,
Also on purpose because I didn't want to get angry or upset if I thought they did something stupid.
yeah. But so
So,
like I came into it being like, I don't like I haven't read the main Silmarillion, let alone do I care about the appendices. So I'm not interested necessarily in this story. Like and I've I've had my hero's journey story of the Fellowship and to a lesser extent the I know like the general arc of Bilbo's story, and it's like I don't necessarily need other giant epics in that world. So yeah, just like these are things I'm like, cool. I'm glad that like the people who love these kinds of things are getting it. I hope it is good. I'm glad to hear that like you're 3 episodes in, having a really good time with it, and very curious to see where they go next. I hope that it doesn't end up being like another Game of Thrones where it's like people had in their mind like this is how this thing should end, and when it doesn't end that way, people get really pissed off and really upset and frustrated and being like,
I
all right,
mean, there's two parts of that. One, like we could dive into it. I guess this is a good transition point. Game of Thrones, right?
yeah.
House of Dragon.
Yes, our other topic is House of the Dragon, where Game of Thrones, but like a couple hundred years earlier.
About 170, 190 years before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like in the pre-crawl,
Is
it was
this where
like
you find out that I'm also a massive Game of Thrones lore nerd?
no, I
Yes,
mean
it
I
is.
mean
Yes, it is.
this I feel like I knew more, and
Yeah.
I've read up through book 4 of Game of Thrones. I don't think I ever
Feast
got
for Crows.
yeah, Feast for Crows I finished. I never got back to like I have Dance with Dragons. I never got back to it. And it was a similar thing for me of like a season would come out. I wouldn't watch it on HBO because I didn't have HBO at the time, but I would watch it when it came to DVD, and then I would be like, that was really cool. Now let me go and read this first book. And then like I did the same thing with the second season. And then through the second book, I was like, all right, let me just keep reading the next books ahead of the show to kind of see where things were coming and going and stuff like that. But I think I still also existed in a time where like I heard about the Red Wedding, then I read it in the books, and then I saw it on the show. It was like my
Mm-hmm.
hierarchy of like my interaction
Yeah.
with that specific event. But yeah, like that's another one where I'm like, I I long ago gave up on those books ever getting actually finished by George R. R. Martin, and so I was like, well, the
Yeah.
show's going to be the best you're going to get, people, because he's gotten so sidetracked. I think he is very much over his skis on that series, and just I don't think in his lifetime he will have a finish for it. It might be
I
picked up and finished by somebody else, and whatever. But I think it's also like the fact that he throws the showrunners under the bus so much of like, well, it's not how it would have ended. It's like you were a consulting producer on the show. Like you
They
had
stopped.
a
No, they
say.
stopped consulting him after season 5.
Says who? Says him?
Says him.
Because I would say that's him reading the feedback from people and being like, yeah, you're right. I didn't have anything to do with this.
No, I would no, because here's the thing: there was a lot of people saying during the production of it that like they had stopped consulting him. They had stopped like they by the end of season. Well, it was also because he was no longer interested in writing an episode for the show anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And because he's like being on the show and going to all these like stuff, like the production stuff. It was cool for the first couple of years, but like I have to like finish writing these books. The problem with George R. R. Martin's, like, the reason everyone's like, oh, it takes him so long, it's like it takes him like a long ass time to write a chapter. Like he does take a long time to write. It's not like he's like bullshitting around. It's like his writing process is, and the problem is it's been made fun of and made a joke of it, but it's called the Myronese Knot, which is this idea that he had a really cool concept of idea of Dany going on this journey to kind of prepare her for like coming to Westeros, and it's gotten itself tied into things so badly that he can't like. It was like trying to get this solved and figured out. He had to make a bunch of other things happen first.
Yeah,
and so like, and it's happening, and like the preview chapters he's released for the next book are pretty cool. This is my big thing about it is
it's been 11 years since the last book. is what
I'm aware. I read it when it came out. I read it. No, my big thing about where things are at with this, and the reason why I like, and this is my big thing too, is when the showrunners made the decisions they made with Dorne in season 5. I smelled trouble, because season 5 is where they introduced a solely, wholly built and written by them version of something that was not from the books. And I saw the cracks, I saw the problems, and I said, this is going to be a problem later on, because we're going to get to serious fan fiction levels of an ending here, where it's not grounded or based in the logic that has been established in the series before it. And that fucking came true. And I'm not surprised. Like, I told everybody, everybody was like, Game of Thrones is the best show that ever been. I was like, listen, it's going, like, once the Red Wedding happened, I said, okay, it's jumped the shark. Because now everybody's going to expect big Red Wedding moments. And nothing in the books has been at the level of the Red Wedding. Even the Purple Wedding, Joffrey's death, was not at the level of the Red Wedding. It happens earlier in the season. And I think they do it right in the show by where it takes place and how there's no big Red Wedding moment. But there's also a lot of other things that you start to see because they didn't cover something that they thought was insignificant in an earlier season. It being a major plot point later in a character's arc, specifically with Tyrion and his relationship with his family. Like, there's a significant character that is basically all but omitted, and she doesn't even show up in the narrative. It's just the history of Tyrion's character doesn't get its payoff for a lot of things in regards to that. And because of that, his character doesn't really work later on. And also, in order, they start making the thing, which is, oh, we really want a scene like this to happen. So this happens so much in the last season, where they have characters be stupider than they are to justify a scene that they want to make happen. And like, that's fine. It was their decision. They were the showrunners. They were the people that were trusted with it. They put it out there. Some people thought it was fine. Some people thought it was bad. I saw the cracks early on. And I also knew that because of the way television is, people wanted a Red Wedding every season. Oh, is this season's Red Wedding moment? You're not ever going to recapture that. It jumps the shark. And so because of that, it starts being like, oh, we're going to counter your expectations, instead of it just being like, no, there's a narrative flow to what happens to the stuff. And people's decisions have consequences. It wasn't like we expected. Our expectations are, especially before Game of Thrones, our expectations were heroes are safe because the plot demands that they're safe. The story demands that they're safe, so they don't have to face the consequences of their decisions. In Game of Thrones, the idea was consequences of people's decisions come into effect, and they end up hurting them. And that's exactly what happens. And so they move away from that.
My argument against that has always been like the characters who are like all the characters who die throughout Game of Thrones, and it is obviously a bloodbath, were not critical characters to the overall story. So they could die at those earlier points in the story. And the issue, like, people just didn't know whether they were critical or not because the story hasn't ended. It's the same thing. Like, the comparison I would draw with the preface of "fuck turfs" is there's no way they went into making the Harry Potter films without having an outline from Rowling of how that story was going to end, so that if they did end up finishing the movies ahead of the books, they would still be able to kind of do something. And I feel like Game of Thrones was the same kind of thing. Like, there's no way that, like, the showrunners didn't have conversations with George R. R. Martin that was like, okay, regardless of when these books come, like, regardless of when you finish these books, like, how does this story end so we know what we're driving towards? And
well, I think that was, and I think that definitely happened. I don't think you're wrong on that. In fact, I know for a fact George R. R. Martin has said that to happen. They asked him, "Hey, who are the characters that survive, and where do they end up?" And he told them. And I don't think in George R. R. Martin's book, where the characters end up are going to be different than where they ended up in the show.
mm-hmm.
I think the way that they get there, the story that's told around that,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. I don't have any problem with where characters ended up in their individual stories going,
Mm-hmm.
or what, like the fact that, oh no, these characters do die at some point. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. The problem that I see people having, because once again, I stopped thinking that this was going to end well, or it was going to end spectacular, like it was going to end in the greatest way possible. I knew that wasn't going to happen because they were missing too many pieces along the way, and the gaps they were filling in with wasn't compelling narrative, for me at least. And so, like, I knew that's how things were going to play out, and that's fine. And I don't have a problem. Like I said, I don't have a problem with how things ended because I was not expecting them to end. My expectations were met by the ending of Game of Thrones because
Mm-hmm.
they weren't that high to begin with. And so on a tip of that scale, also, it's like, okay, so is this where these characters end up? Well, I'm interested to see how they end up there in the books,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a part of the problem with, okay, well, the characters need to, and this is also part of the problem with the showrunners, is they said the characters need to end up in these places.
Yeah.
When and this is the one thing I think they should have done, which is say, well, where is our story, and how is our story going to lead these characters to where they end up going? Because we're telling a different story at this point.
I think ultimately, like, if somehow miraculously Martin does finish the books, I think that there's no way that the response to the show has not influenced how he makes changes and stuff like that. So I think
he'd have to,
that the characters would end in different places, and he could be like, oh, this is what people want. I mean, it would basically, like, I can see him J.J. Abramsing it, basically, of like, oh, people didn't like how Last Jedi was, so I'm gonna try and do this and do things my way in Rise of Skywalker, and that's not gonna work out for anybody.
The thing about that is, I would think that he'd have to have these things written to already be making those changes to them.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's much more of like a, like.
I'm just saying, like, yeah. I think if this hypothetical, like, he went with them and said, here's the outline of, here's how the story ends in my mind, I think he gives them that, they do some version of that, and the response is not like, I don't like how the showrunners did it. The response is I don't like how Dany's story ends, or I don't like how Jon Snow's story ends, or, like, regardless of, like, I think the line there is too blurred that I see Martin going back and being like, oh, well, let me just scratch this out then and change my outline, and I'm gonna rejigger this, and maybe that's what is adding to taking so long. Anyway, diversion.
Anyway,
let's talk about House of Dragon. We've traveled back in time a couple hundred years. So theoretically, we know big picture how the story ends for.
Yeah. By the way, that definitely has influenced a big. There's a plot point that's brought up about this, and it's just like, it falls so fucking flat because of the way season 8 ends.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a part of it that ends it just falls tremendously flat because of it. It's because it's one of the most important things out of the books. It's one of the most important things out of the overall world and story. But because of the way Game of Thrones season 8 ended things, to quote to subvert your expectations on what was going to happen, um it just falls really fucking flat. And so I'm not concerned whatsoever with that overarching thing. I couldn't give a shit about it. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
What matters is that they're telling a cool ass Civil War story, the way that they're doing it, and they're doing it because this is a generational story. So House of Dragons is taking place during the very fabled Dance of Dragons, which was the Civil War that almost brought and really sets up for the end of House Targaryen. So we are seeing House Targaryen at their zenith, at their peak, at their like the highest point that they've ever ruled. They have 10 adult dragons that they have, like, that they may not necessarily have riders for all the time, but they have 10 adult dragons. Like, they're at the height of their power as far as they've established their kingdom. And it starts with an explanation of what happens with the succession crisis, where Jaehaerys, basically the old man king at the beginning of the first episode, makes a decision to let the lords decide who's going to be his heir, because who his heir is not clear cut. And it kind of sets up a point of being like, hey, there's actually some vulnerability here, because there's enough Targaryens that there's now kind of an issue with who's going to rule. And they end up choosing Viserys, who is Jaehaerys' next eldest male heir.
Yeah.
Versus
bypassing the eldest heir that would have been the
daughter of his eldest son.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had his eldest son, who was his heir, had a daughter. And then his second son or third son had a son that was Viserys. And the problem that
basically
arose from this...
Sexism wins out, and they go with Viserys instead.
Well, yeah, because basically the question is, well, is it the eldest son's heir, which would be a daughter, or is it the eldest male relative, which they end up going with? There are a few interesting notes that I'm going to put out here that they don't cover on the show, one of which is that because of the frustration between the Starks and the Targaryens during Jaehaerys' reign, it added fuel, and also because northern traditions are different than southern traditions. The North actually backed Rhaenyra's claim. It wasn't unanimous. The Lords of the Seven Kingdoms weren't unanimously against having a female heir. Particularly houses that have old claims back to the First Men supported Rhaenyra's, which is an interesting thing to know. Because it certainly comes up later with what ends up happening later on. And so you have what's really fascinating about this story is that it's a story about a family that does care about and love each other, and what ends up happening to them as power and responsibilities end up kind of throwing things into a bad mix. And it's very, very cool. I'm really enjoying it. This is what I loved about Game of Thrones, which is the politicking and the people's choices having consequences and people acting true to their nature. Out of, like, you have Daron, who is played by brilliantly by Matt Smith. Matt Smith is absolutely just dominating as this role of this handsome, captivating, charismatic, brutal, and, like, on some levels terrifying individual, who is just like, and it is set up to be the heir of the king, his brother, over his brother's daughter. And because of an incident that happens in the first episode, that's thrown out of the works, because Daron is essentially disinherited from the line of the throne, and Viserys puts his daughter in front of him. And to settle it, to make sure that there's not going to be a problem with it, he has all the lords of the Seven Kingdoms kneel and swear loyalty to Rhaenyra as his heir. And then that creates a problem when Viserys remarries and has a son. And that's kind of like where we're at now, is we're setting up this issue of these two lines of from the first wife and the second wife. And the first wife only has a daughter, but she has been confirmed by all the lords of the realm to be the heir. And so we're dealing with, like, yeah, sexism is a massive part of this. This is a huge part of what the story is being told here. And it is heavily prevalent as a theme of the show. And then on top of that, you also have the idea of what does legitimacy mean? What does it mean when you have a dynasty of kings that Viserys is the I think he's like the fifth or sixth king overall. Like this is only like the Targaryens ruled for 300 years. We're about 100 years into that, like 100 plus years into that reign.
Mm-hmm.
This has not been around for as long, and you have other families who literally the Starks were kings for thousands of years in the north. It's the same thing all over the Seven Kingdoms. So you have these guys who conquered all these kingdoms by conquest and dragon fire, by fire and blood, as they call it. That's the words of House Targaryen. And you're getting to see, okay, well, we know how they gained power. They still have the method by which they gained power, but these are the issues and struggles of them trying to maintain it. Because you can't always maintain it with fire and blood. And what happens when the people who are contesting the throne's legitimate heir of the throne also are part of your same family, and you're seeing this schism, this split, and they've decided rather than introduce us at the height of the beginning of the conflict, like where things kick off in the conflict, they're saying no. They made the really, I think, smart decision to go back and say we are laying the seeds of what this problem is. We are laying those seeds, and so they're taking their time in this first season to be very particular about laying those seeds down that they know, because this is also part of the thing, because this is part of a novella that already was written by George R.R. Martin. This is part of like an established part of the lore and history. Things are determined. We know the end of it, but now we're seeing the blanks be filled in. And I think they're doing a lot of work to plant seeds, knowing that people will be able to trust that they're going to pay it off, because they already did that by episode 3. Episode 3 had massive payoffs of seeds that were planted in episode 1. And as it looks like they're keeping that very strong narrative thread throughout it. And I love the behind the scenes stuff that they're doing for it at the end of each episode, because there's so many cool things that they're pulling from the books from. They're doing something different about it. They are really setting up, like, people dress differently than they do in the Game of Thrones show. People have, like, there's different styles and things about that make sense for a medieval society. It's 190 years from then. Also, and so, like, there's some... Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's also, like, even fast forward to, like, the dress that would have predated King Baratheon would have been, influenced by generations of Targaryen attire versus, what we get in Game of Thrones proper.
It's great.
I appreciate that they're at least, like, and I fully would expect that, like, production design people are definitely going to lean into that stuff, because that's what they love doing, and they love kind of getting to explore it. I will say I did enjoy, because I only watched, we talked about this a little bit beforehand, I only watched like the first half of the first episode so far before I was like, I'm going to bounce off this and maybe circle back to it when I'm in a different headspace or something. But I did appreciate the imagery of, like, Matt Smith there on the much more malevolent Iron Throne that had, like, just was, like, littered with swords down the hallway, more akin to how it is detailed and described in the books and stuff like that, because it was and even the intro bit about and since I haven't watched more of it, I don't know if it's, like, pays off, but the idea that Daenerys has, like, this scab or this wound on him that's not scabbing over from sitting on that stupid throne. Appreciating just, like, even that having, like, a presence in this that like, obviously is still iconic from Game of Thrones, but, like, it almost, like, it's getting its fangs back in a almost quite literal sense. And it's like the showrunners are basically like, hey, there's going to be elements that but this is, a new story we're telling, and we hope you come along for the ride.
It's been cool, man. I've been really enjoying it. I think it's great. I think it's done such an amazing job of recapturing the original magic that Game of Thrones first season had, which is characters, but you know who's important, and you know who you're following.
Yeah.
And you know whose story whose journey this story is about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very cool that they're actually, and like I said, it's just so cool that they're taking the time to plant the seeds for what's to come later. Yeah. And I think a lot of other showrunners and the guys who who are taking this on would have made that mistake. And I think that it's absolutely brilliant that they did.
Yeah.
So
it's, again, like I'm speaking it certainly from a place of more ignorance than anything else. But like I remember like comparing in my own head to like the first episode of this versus the first episode of Game of Thrones that was like, hey, we're getting a very like thorough introduction to everybody in the Stark family, and thinking like, oh, that's a good way to like ground this universe and then start kind of like littering in, you know, new other characters and stuff like that, with like, you know, with some of the Lannisters there being kind of on site for the big trip down to King's Landing and stuff. And I remember thinking for this one, I was like, oh yeah, I guess they're kind of doing that same thing with the Targaryens. But then I was also like, I don't know who any of these people on the council are, and I don't know who any of them are gonna, if or what any of them are gonna end up being important. So
that comes up later on. Like they are doing very good jobs of like not shoehorning that at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up like these characters and their like positions and everything come up are very slowly kind of like teased out a little bit, and it's done very, very well. Episode 3 gave a big spotlight to one of his counselors who's like not really named or not really given too much attention to, but he's the guy who tells him like he's the guy who makes the comment, no woman has ever sat on the Iron Throne. That guy has like, it's like, oh, is that one guy saying something? And then he plays out in episode 2 having a little bit more time and you get to know his character better. And then episode 3 he really gets a moment to shine in a really great way.
Yeah.
That I think is just setting up perfect because he himself and his 2 sons that they introduced both of his sons in this 3rd episode become very important figures as far as like things go in the story going forward.
Mm-hmm.
But by setting up kind of like this generational thing, you get a feeling of like importance to it.
Yeah.
That's great. But then also I will say that one of my favorite things they did in episode 1 at the beginning is when Rhaenyra is flying over King's Landing, it makes a very important point to show like the dragon pit is there, but also like very visibly missing the Sept of Baelor.
Mm-hmm.
The Sept of Baelor is completely not existent because Baelor, who the Sept is built in honor of, hasn't been born yet.
There you go. Yeah.
So it's cool seeing those aspects of it. And also the intro is, a lot of people are like, well, what's this intro about? I don't understand it. And what people don't know is that it's showing the bloodline of the Targaryens.
Hmm.
So as it starts off with like Valyria, old Valyria, and then as blood spills out, and it's like a river of blood. What it's doing and what it's showing is there are symbols. Some of them are crowns, some of them are not crowns, but they're symbols of each of the Targaryen siblings in that line, in that lineage.
Yeah.
And what it's showing as the river spills and goes in a certain direction is showing who the ruling line has gone through. And so you get to where it's at now with Viserys, and then you get it with the blood spilling over on all of them, on all the siblings, sigil, like little crown areas. And it's like that's to show like that's where things are going to. They're going to spill over in blood. It's going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be very terrible.
Yeah.
And the reason, and for people who don't know, it's called the Dance of Dragons because when dragons fight in the sky, it looks like they're dancing.
Yeah. There you go.
Little fun note to end things with.
Yeah. Well, very cool. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Maybe once the full season shakes out, I'll try and circle back around to it, or maybe I'll get bored.
That scene might be like the most that scene might be the most brutal scene. I'd say the joust afterwards.
As we were talking about, I realized the joust is where I bounced off.
Oh, the joust. Yeah, the joust is about as rough and bloody as things kind of get as far as like length of duration of like gore.
Mm-hmm.
That joust actually got really intense and really violent.
Very violent, and I was like, okay, I don't need this. Especially
it was the axe being buried in the dude's face, right? That's right. It's also intercut with
the other trauma that's happening.
The C-section and everything that's happening. Yeah. No, it's brutal. It's awful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no. That is by far I think like up there with being like one of the most brutal scenes in all of like Game of Thrones cinematic universe, or not cinematic, but like television universe.
Yeah.
That scene is up there, but I think it's also showing that this is like the world of men versus like the battlefield of men versus the battlefield of women.
Yeah.
It's poetic and it's very insightful, but at the same time, it is not like it's queasy. Like it is fucked up on so many levels. Yeah, no, that
Yeah,
I get why you tapped out there.
They take
it
full
hasn't gotten
advantage
to
of the
that point yet.
TVMA kind of ratings and stuff like that. Yeah.
You know, they take advantage of it being HBO for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably as brutal as things get, even with the even with like some like battle scenes later on that they show off. It's nothing is as bad as that.
Mm-hmm.
I can honestly say nothing is as bad as that dual scene of the joust and the C-section. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well.
Also, you're right at the end of the episode. You could have finished it.
Yeah, true. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I look forward to continuing to discuss with you in the weeks to come, as both of these shows really kind of continue on through their first seasons here. Very big year for high fantasy stuff.
Indeed.
In 2022. Lastly, switching over to my topic of the day, Disney Dreamlight Valley is the new Stardew Valley / Animal Crossing from Gameloft Studios. That is basically like, hey, it's like Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing, but with Disney characters. And it's in early access.
So it's emphatically your jam.
It is emphatically my jam. Yes. It's something that like I've been keeping an eye on for a little while, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. Like I'll check it out when it comes out. And I get like I've gotten a few little like immediate like press emails and stuff like that about it. And it's like, admittedly, since we don't really do a lot in terms of written coverage or anything like that, I a lot of those just kind of like sit in my inbox unresponded to. But I did like reach back out to them. It was like, hey, thank you for letting us know about it. I'm keeping an eye on it. I'll definitely like think to check it out when it comes, especially because it came to Game Pass. And I was like, all right, I can check it out on Game Pass. No charge or anything like that. And it came out on Tuesday, which because of my work schedule was the end of my 3-day Labor Day weekend. So I spent pretty much all of Tuesday playing the game. I recorded my first hour for Let's Play that went up on Thursday this week, and then just kept playing through it and have been thoroughly addicted to it the last couple days. I have, however, reached the point where like, so in addition to being like Stardew Valley and stuff like that, it gives you like little quest lines to go through, and like there are like relationships you can build with each of your people, and you can basically like level up the relationships. I've leveled up the relationship with almost every villager up to like the max level of 10. My personal character has reached like the current max level of 40, and I've got almost all of like the quests and side quests done.
Jeez.
In the 4 or 5 days that I've been playing the game. So they've already announced like additional content that's coming. It's very weird because like you can open up the entire island, but there are things that even doing all of the quests that are available currently in the game, like areas will be locked off, because it does it in the same way that like in a Harvest Moon game, your base level axe can chop like little sticks, but you can't chop stumps until you like level up your axe. There are the similar vibes to like doing certain quests will like empower your magical axe or your magical shovel or your magical watering can to like allow you to take out other parts of the environment. And there are just areas that are basically like completely blocked off until you get through that quest and like unlock the access. It's very like Metroidvania like, I guess, as well. So even once I've done everything, I'm still not going to be able to like see every part of this island, seemingly because some of those things are going to just be introduced in future updates. They've already announced, I believe, like Scar gets introduced next, and then they're gonna have like some Toy Story stuff with Buzz and Woody joining the island. But yeah, it's still like a ton of fun, and has been extremely my jam. Fun little I mean, like it's very lightly like audio, like all of the characters have like a voice actor, but they're not like reading out all of the dialogue or anything like that. They're there for like reaction voices and stuff like that. And I also don't know how the timing works because I'll play the game at like 3 in the afternoon or something like that, and Mickey will run around like, "Whoa, what a wonderful morning!" And it's like it's not at all morning here, Mickey, but like the like time clock is synced to like when
Mhm.
it's evening here, it's becoming evening on the island stuff. So yeah, just weird stuff like that. But yeah, there's like fishing stuff. There's a lot of cooking. You like one of the first things you can unlock is like Remy, and so basically you can like unlock Remy's restaurant where you can do a whole bunch of like cooking, and you get new ingredients for each. Like there's a lot in this game. You start out in kind of your like little core plaza, and then from there you start unlocking different biomes. There's like a meadow, there's a beach, there's a kind of swamp glade area, there's a forest, there's the sunlit plateau, which is basically like desert kind of area. There's the like forbidden lands, which is like it's kind of the last area, and then there's also a like basically a glacial area, like a ice area. And so you kind of like you're doing quests and you're doing like little things to build up your like dreamlight power, and then to unlock each of those other areas it's like, oh, it's going to cost you 3,000 dreamlight to get into this area. You're getting like you'll get, much like Animal Crossing, you'll get like a quest that'll be like, hey, catch 2 fish, and you'll get 100 dreamlight once you catch 2 fish. Or there's like longer trackers of like, hey, you've now caught 100 fish, so here's your bonus for that, and stuff like that. So that's how different areas are being unlocked, and then different like characters get unlocked and invited to your island through a similar kind of thing. You go into like the big castle, and you can go into like different forbidden realm, or different, not forbidden, different realms, which is where you get Remy. It's where you get like the Frozen characters. It's where you get Wally. And it took me far too long to realize that's where you got the Frozen characters, because
Ah.
they would have also helped me out in unlocking some of the other parts of the the world I couldn't get to.
Okay.
Who's the last? Oh, there's like a Moana world basically where you can get Moana and Maui, and then you've also got just like Disney mainstays like Donald and Goofy and Mickey and Minnie, and Uncle Scrooge runs the shop. Is Uncle Scrooge is basically your Tom Nook type, so he's who you pay to upgrade your house and get more storage or more space and stuff like that. And you can also, like, in each little biome, Goofy has a stand, which is where you can go and like sell everything off to, or you can buy like seeds, or one random like fruit or vegetable, or like other forageable good in that glade, in that area, and you can basically like pay to upgrade Goofy's stand to like a third level in each space, in order, and which you need to do if you want to get like be able to buy all of the seeds in each area. You can have characters kind of go around with you, and you can like assign them to like a bonus basically. So you can have like, you can assign them to, what is it, like a farming bonus, a mining bonus, foraging, fishing, or digging. And basically whatever bonus you assign them to, as you do that, like, oh, I'm mining this, this rock, trying to get this gem, and if I've got the person that has a mining bonus with me, they'll occasionally like give me a double or something like that. Like I'll mine an amethyst, and they'll be like, here, have another amethyst. It's just kind of like a
Okay.
bonus little extra thing for you. Or same with like, here, hey, you've done some planting, you picked some rice, here's some extra rice to go along with that one that you just harvested. So like little, so it's always like better to go around with the characters. Also, like as you're doing these chores with characters, that's leveling up their relationship with you. Once like you reach certain,
Okay.
like every level, they give you a bonus, whether that's like a costume piece or a furniture piece, or in some cases just like extra gold or something. But then every couple levels, they'll also unlock like a new story quest for you or something like that. And you can kind of go through the quest line. Like the Frozen quest line, for example. Kristoff is like one of the first people you'll find in the game. And then you can find Anna and Elsa, but like Elsa won't join your village immediately. Like Anna joins first, and then once you get to a certain point in Anna's storyline, then she'll be like, hey, I really want Elsa to come join us here in the village. Please go and do this fetch quest, find all these, collect all these items, bring them together, craft whatever you need to craft, and then take them to Elsa, and then that'll get Elsa to come join your village and stuff. So, yeah, it's like there's been a fun, like, until really today, there's always been something that I'm like working towards, and even today I'm still like, I've still got things I'm working towards. Right now, the barrier I'm at is
Mhm.
a couple other characters you can get are Ursula and Ariel from The Little Mermaid.
So you got like a sea barrier you got to get through.
It's not that it's a sea barrier, it's they, because they are aquatic characters, they can't follow you around and get like leveled up as you're farming and stuff like that.
Oh, that
You
makes
can
sense. Okay.
they just kind of like are always swimming somewhere around the island, and they'll swim everywhere, and so like they're constantly on the move, so you also have to like just go and find them wherever they are. Unfortunately, like the map tells you where everybody is, so it's like easy to navigate to, and there's some fast travel stuff, so you can like bounce from one part of the island to the other pretty quickly. But since they don't follow you around, the only ways to really like boost their like relationship and get their levels up to unlock the next quests are each day you can give like you can give gifts to people at any time, but there's like a daily like 3 gifts that are going to be like their favorite gifts for that day that'll give you an extra
Hmm.
boost. um
Okay.
and you can like talk to them, once a day, and kind of have like a, like they'll ask you questions or you ask them questions. There's just like a little bit of a conversation there, so you get like a boost like that. But like other characters, for example, will show up at Remy's restaurant, and you can cook them a meal as like an extra way to give them a boost in the relationship. So Ursula and Ariel, it's just like a lot harder to level them up effectively. So that's like I'm at level 7 with them, and I'm at level 10 with everybody else. And have done everybody else's like 10th level quests. So I'm just kind of like working through that, and the last person I'm going to like recruit to my island is going to be Prince Eric from Little Mermaid, and basically like he's going to be at the end of the Ariel quest line is when I'm going to be able to get him. So
Okay.
yeah, it's kind of like, so there's still something I'm always kind of like working towards, but it's also like a, oh, there's it definitely would have behooved me to not have like binged this game over the course of the last week. To spread some of that out until the next like big update stuff and stuff comes. But yeah, it has been extremely my jam, extremely, especially in this time where I'm in right now of like there isn't really a ton of other things calling to me. Prior to this, I put a ton of time into Skyrim, and was like playing my daily Fortnite. This game came out and was the only game I touched the rest of this week until I reached this point today where I'm like, okay, I'm just kind of like waiting on things at this point. So let me
Hmm.
go hop back to Fortnite, and maybe I'll maybe tonight I'll hop back into Skyrim a little bit or something. But yeah, other than that, I mean, it's like definitely a lot of fun. Um, I haven't played too much with the like, let me go ahead and craft, or like, because as you pick up things in the environment, you unlock crafting recipes based on like what you've got. Um, and you can also just buy stuff from Scrooge's shop and upgrade Scrooge's shop to buy more stuff. And that's just like Animal Crossing. It's like things will reset and you'll get like new items to buy every day kind of thing. And I haven't done a ton in terms of, um, like decorating my house, or like
Hmm.
I decorated like parts of the island because they were like connected to quests of like, hey, drop down 10 items in this biome to fulfill a quest, and so I would do that kind of stuff. But I haven't like played around too much with that, so that might be something I check out. I didn't realize for the longest time, but you can even customize your outfits, and like one of the collectibles that you're getting is like customization elements that you can put onto attire. So you can basically like, you can have Mickey ears that you customize and throw on like a little, little logo or something you want, or you can throw on, different images that you collect throughout the game. So I finally, like, I think just today was like, oh, I finally, that's what this customize button is. Let me go do that. So I created like a custom like blue shirt with like the Mickey Mouse ears silhouette, and then like I threw squares on over as like the glasses to be like that's as close enough to the pixel glasses kind of motif that I can do. So yeah, now I'm running around my island with like a little like custom like that nerdy Mickey shirt. And yeah, so it's definitely a fun time. I've been having a lot of fun with it. Interested to see what they continue to do with it. And especially since I haven't I played so much Animal Crossing and then just put that down, haven't ever gone back to it. Like this is very much scratching that Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley itch, and has been a ton of fun. So if you like those kinds of games, and or are a Disney fan, check it out, especially if you have Xbox Game Pass, because it's basically free there. Other than that, I think it's basically like what you're getting with Xbox Game Pass is the Founders Pack, which is I think like $30 or $40, something like that, and it gets you like there is like not pay to win, but there's like microtransaction elements because ultimately this is also going to be a mobile game. And those elements are like there's an event going right now that's like Pixar themed, and you can get other little quests every day, or just other little quests that you can complete. And as you complete those, instead of getting like the Dreamlight currency that you're leveling up with, you get like little Pixar balls or whatever, and then you can like redeem those for shirts or just other design items and stuff like that. And it's framed in a battle pass kind of thing, so it's like there's a free version of that, but there are certain items on each page that will only unlock if you like use the premium currency. And the Founders Pack gets you like enough premium currency, I think, for like the first couple seasons of what they do with that. So yeah, definitely, especially with Xbox Game Pass, definitely worth checking out. Otherwise, there's, a bunch of streams and stuff like that. I mean, you go check out our Let's Play and see if like this seems like a thing that might be interested to you. And yeah, that's those are my thoughts on Disney Dreamlight Valley. Fun stuff. Shout out to John Drake over there at Disney, just helping shepherd a whole bunch of interesting games out there. Like, yeah, because it's basically Disney plus Stardew Valley plus Animal Crossing plus The Sims, and just like, hey, have fun with those things. Have fun as a life sim game with Disney characters. Yeah, that's my thoughts there. Any questions I can shed any light on? Anything else like that?
No, you basically. I mean, I didn't have too many interest. I don't have too much interest or questions to begin with, but it sounds interesting enough now that you explained it. So
yeah,
I'm gonna check it out. We'll see.
Yep. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode. Cam and I are gonna go grab dinner after this and hang out for a little bit. So we're gonna keep our conversation going, but that's gonna do it for this episode of That Nerdy Site Show. Thank you, Cam, for joining me. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot, 2 B's, 2 T's. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Cam?
Yeah, I mean, keep your eyes tuned on youtube.com/thatnerdysite because the final 2 episodes of Friday Night Dying Light are on their way out. So
cool.
Yeah, it's time to put a final nail in this in the coffin of not coffin. That's the wrong way to put it. It's time to put these out to just be out there and be done with this project.
Yeah,
I'm very much looking forward to concluding.
Coffin wouldn't work anyway because undead. So
there you go. That's a problem. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will echo that sentiment. Go check out Friday Night Dying Light. Also, I will shout out Logan has a written piece up on the site recently about, you guessed it, James Bond, because it's really the only thing he'll talk about or write about these days. So you can go read his writing about kind of the golden era of James Bond stuff, basically like between GoldenEye and Casino Royale, when there was just like a bunch of movies as well as a plethora of games over a course of like a 17-year span, is the era he grew up in, and a large reason of why he is the Bond fan that he is. So go check out his writing on that. As well as all of our other stuff over at thatnerdysite.com. Also, one last shout out. I'm going to be back on the Castle Vault podcast, our friends over at the Castle Vault this week, for an extremely goofy movie. My first time ever watching that one, despite my
Oh,
love of the first movie. So they were kind enough to invite me back for it. So I look forward to joining them this week. It's always a fun time going and catching up with them, but in particular on a brand new movie for me. So yeah, check that out as well. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.